Yo, me and Nick, we did not collaborate on to wear white, but hey, that's what it's about. That's what it's about.
We just on the same level, my brother. We just on the same level, man. We just on the same goddamn page. We're on the same page with this panel too. This panel will be fire, brother. I'm gonna start with this video. I've been starting all my panels with this video. Now that we got our juices going, we got a fantastic. Midwestern Marx has been great friends of RBN. I learned a lot from their content. Marxism is a very complicated science, and I'm still learning. Like, I try my best to interpret Marx and apply it to my everyday life. Look at the material needs of the people and apply it right now. And that's why these conversations are important. Not only to teach people about Marxism and the utility and organizing this have, but to sharpen our tools as Marxists, because I feel like there's always stuff you can learn. Absolutely. Always stuff you can learn. So let's start with this banger video, and then I'm going to introduce my guest. This is from one of the people who joined us today, Eddie Liger, Midwestern Marx. Always put out these banger videos. Check this out.
Difference between Marxism, communism, and socialism. Marxism is a way of studying society, a worldview. It says that societies change and move based on struggles between conflicting economic classes. So the Civil War that transformed America, by example, is a product of class struggle. Slave owners in the American South were drawn into a struggle with both the slaves and the capitalists in the American North. This class struggle culminated in the Civil War, which replaced slavery as the economic system in the American South with capitalism, which is a progressive step forward. The slaves became wage laborers. But in this new economic system, capitalism, struggle happens between the wage laborers and the capitalists. And once the workers seize political power from the capitalists and begin to transfer economic power to themselves, we have socialism, an economic system where the state and the surplus of society are controlled by the workers. As workers continue to construct their new society, they eventually get to a point where economic classes don't even exist. The only class is the working class, who produces for themselves and for the benefit of society. And at that point, you have communism. So socialism is sort of like a transitory stage where you have a dictatorship of the proletariat, control of the government by the workers. And Marxism is just the study of how these class struggles happen. Communism is the classless society that we can eventually reach. And there's your lesson for today. I hope you learned something. Carlos would be proud of me for this one.
Let's see if Carlos approves of that. We got our friends at Midwestern Marx with us. I can't believe it's possible to be that base, Eddie. Oh, great video as always. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I'm gonna start with Eddie because we showed your video. We had Eddie on here before. It's great to be in dialogue with Carlos and Noah. I believe this is the first time we had to chat. You guys do a lot of great educational videos. You guys even host classes regarding Marxism. So I'm gonna ask you guys this question just as a baseline. Why do you pursue and why do you advocate for Marxism? Why do you think it's worth our time learning about it? Let's just start there and we work our way around the conversation. Let's start with Eddie. Can we play this video? And then just for sake of order, we can go Carlos and Noah after that. And also use this time as a way to introduce yourself. We had Eddie on here, and this first time I'm chatting with Carlos and Noah. So you can explain why you think Marxism is worth it pursuing and kind of an intro to yourself and why you started doing this.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having us on, guys. Appreciate it. I'm Eddie Liger, one of the directors and writers and editors for MidWestern Marx. We have an institute where we put out theoretical works, written works. We have a publishing press that's mostly spearheaded by Carlos there. And then we also just do tons of social media education through pretty much any social media platform, but TikTok has really been the one that's blown up. Our YouTube is, we post pretty consistently there too, but we just feel that education is the key. Without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement, as Lenin said, and that's because it puts us on the same page. And by reading theory, you can learn so much about practical organizing and answer so many questions about organizing that have already been debated in the past. So rather than get hung up on the same issues and the same debates over and over and over again, by reading theory, we can sort of all put ourselves on the same page. And theory is to be debated and discussed, of course, but It kind of gives us a collective understanding of what our path forward is. So I had something else I was gonna say, but I'll leave it.
We can pass it to Carlos.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I remember Lenin said that theory is just the collective experience of the working class taken in general, right? So if we're trying to organize a better world, if we're trying to bring the workers to power, why would we not learn from the revolutionary working classes of the past, both in our own country and internationally? So theory is just the number one way to get ahead of the bourgeoisie, to understand this system and understand how we can change it.
I want to pass it to Carlos, then we go to Noah. The same kind of premise. You can introduce yourself so the audience know who you are. Why you personally got to Marxism? Why you think it's important to learn?
Well, first, thank you guys so much for having us here and for having this, what I consider to be a historic event. I've been listening in as much as I can, and I've been moved a lot, especially with the interview with Chris Smalls. It's, on the money, and it really gets at a lot of the reasons why we ended up founding the Institute. So about a little bit about myself, I'm a philosophy professor, and I'm one of the directors for the Institute. A lot of my work deals with popularizing Marxist philosophy, the dialectical materialist worldview, because I think it's the best way for us to really understand the world in general, not just our societies and our class struggles, and but also sciences. Like the Soviets had some of the most advanced sciences in the world in their time, and this was because they applied a method that says, hey, let's not separate this thing from that, or analyze this thing by removing it from its context and treating it as a dead entity, when in reality it exists in movement, it exists in interconnection with everything else. It exists within specific wholes that we have to understand the part in relationship to the whole, how the whole gives meaning to the part, and how the assortment of the parts make up the whole. And this method, I think, is largely something that has already been embedded in people's common sense. You wouldn't trust a boxing judge that gets there at the 12th round. How are you going to trust someone that only saw one round of the fight? You need to see the whole fight, how each round is connected to all the other ones, and how each round plays into the whole fight. And, that's the essence of the dialectical materialist worldview. See things in their processes, in their interconnections, and from the standpoint of the totality, from the whole. So, that gets us not just at a better understanding of our societies and our class struggles, and hence how to move forward, right? Because that's another part of it. It's not just understanding, but it's also changing in a revolutionary manner the world we live in. But it also helps us with science, and it helps us with everything else. And, the people that have the most advanced Marxism right now, in my view, are the Chinese. And they are applying it to every field of society and just developing at speeds that are just incomparable with the West. So, I'll leave it there. I'll pass it on to Noah.
Noah, the same kind of question. If you want to, I'll pass it to you, my brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us on, brother. It's an honor, honestly, and I'm glad we can finally meet. I've known JB for a while now. My history is a little unique compared to the other directors of the Institute. I grew up, my dad, who everybody calls Pops, right? He was a union man, right? My grandparents were from the Soviet Union. So we had a house where communism was just always viewed positively. And I sort of gave up on everything. For a while, I, had this teenage rebellion phase and went to LA telling my parents I was going to be an anarchist and all this just weird stuff. But around the Bernie and Trump phenomena, I sort of saw what was happening in society, and all of these young people coming to these realizations just inspired me to get back in the fight. And here I am. I think Marxism is how we understand how to fight. We can't understand a way forward and out of the immiseration and conditions that the working class, all of us, are in different forms without understanding how society works. And so when we pick up Marxism, we pick up the way society works. It gives us the general laws of development of society. And so that teaches you how to move forward. It can create a broad strategy, and even teach you how to apply tactics in individual conditions. It gives you that entire relationship. Without getting too deep into it, I'm a carpenter. I'm not, an academic or anything like that. And just knowing these things has gotten me in a place where every coworker that I work with at my shop is on board for class struggle, is on board for socialism and the way forward. And that's because of Marxism.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pass it to JB, and you can kind of add to this discussion as well. But I remember I voted for Jill Stein in 2016, and you guys know the Green Party is a socialist party. They're eco-socialists. But when I voted for Jill Stein in 2016, I didn't know what the fuck an eco-socialist was. I generally advocated for my community's material conditions, and I was strongly anti-war. I was strongly anti-empire because I acknowledged the harmful relationship that our U.S. empire has with not only global violence, but with our current material needs. This is late-stage empire and capitalism and the relationship with the empire, correct? So I always had general Marxist principles, but I was not a Marxist. I was not a socialist. But then once I started reading theory, and I always give Rome big process to this day, because I would say, yeah, I'm more of a socialist, democratic socialist, whatever. And then Rome was just asking me a question like, why aren't you a communist? I'm like, I don't know. I ain't read the shit. So I read the critiques of Marxism, and I want you, in general, Marxism is a critique of capitalism. So once I read a little bit of theory, I read State and Revolution. I read a few of these very important literature, right? And then it wasn't anything that was mind-blowing to me. I inherently knew it was correct. I was like, I always knew this stuff. Like, and people who are anti-establishment, people who are worker friendly, and I always had this conflict with authoritarian capitalist power, whether you want to call it authority, unchecked authority, and that come from the belief of wanting a dictatorship of the proletariat. As a young age, I saw the wealth of the Walton family, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, what is this? Walmart workers don't make this much, but I didn't know the theory of labor value. So it was something to me. Once I actually read it, like when Rome asked me the question, I couldn't answer it because I didn't read it. So once I read it, I'm like, oh, this is, I inherently know this is true. But if anyone want to chime in on that, I can pass it to JB afterwards. Anyone want to chime in on that, and then I'll pass it to JB.
Yeah, let me just real quick. That is exactly what I always say. That for working class people, learning Marxism is just giving words to things you already knew all along.
Yep. Go ahead, Eddie.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. A lot of the things you know implicitly, but Marxism gives you the words to explain it to others. You know, like the reason that the Walton family has such an obviously absurd amount of money is because of exploitation. You know, they're paying their workers far less than the value that they actually create, and then the Walton family are taking home surplus value despite not taking part in production or distribution or any of the things that actually create value.
What's that, Eddie? James, I want to get you in here. You've been taking a lot of Marxism classes, and as someone a lot of people don't know, one of the reasons I know JB in Rome, and it was like one of my first guests on my original YouTube channel, where I just had a few of my Twitter mutuals watch that show, and I can tell you guys firsthand the progress of JB in terms of analyzing our culture and discussing material conditions. And JB was always sharp. That's why I had him on my show. But the difference is night and day. 2023 JB versus 2020 JB. The same way you can see the difference between me then. And because JB's willingness to learn, he was part of the Marxism classes. So I want to pass to you, JB, for any thoughts on Marxism, or you can compound on what anyone said as well. I just want to throw you in the panel as well, brother.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit of a harrowing explanation because I have 3 of my professors in front of me that will probably be grading me on this afterwards. But one of the things that I wanted to discuss, number one, thank you guys for joining us for this summit. This is actually extremely imperative that you guys are here. And a lot of people who will be watching this is like, what does Marxism have to do with workers? It has everything to do with workers. That's the point of Marxism. And the critique is really the relation of workers to production, workers to the means of production, meaning the coffee house, the farm, the shop, the office. It all has to do with relation to all of that. And so because of this, it shows that what type of society do you want? Do you want a society where you and your fellow co-workers, not just in your place of employment, but all across the nation, do you want all of us to run this country? Or do you want a small minority, a subset of this country to run everything and then gatekeep all of us out when it comes to the necessities and the concrete needs that we have in our life? If you're going to be for the former, then welcome to Marxism, because you're literally going into a critique of the system that really subjugates us to exploitation. And if you're through being exploited, then this is the way we go about it. And one of the things that I've learned is that, just like it was said earlier, I am now actually just getting words to something that I've already known all along. And once you start to learn that, oh, somebody already put a word to this and there's already a complete and concise definition to it, what happens is you start to want to know more about the thoughts of the person who did this scientific analysis. Once you start to go into that scientific analysis, then you start to connect the dots. And then you start to form an even deeper understanding of the system, even more than your fellow co-workers or your contemporaries. Then you can also go to your fellow workers and contemporaries and explain this, and then you end up building class consciousness. And this building class consciousness is something that the corporate dictators do not want, because that class consciousness is what will overthrow them. This is why reading and writing among slaves, the enslaved, was illegal, because that meant that we learned what they didn't want us to know so that we could overthrow the oppressors. That's the same thing. This is why Marxism is so vilified. Yesterday, Second Thought actually had a 30-minute video on YouTube about cultural Marxism and how Marxism is really demonized because it is a critique of a system that they, the corporate elite, benefit from. So if you are sick and tired of the Bezoses, the Crows, and the Gates, then it would behoove you to learn class consciousness. Part of that is also learning things like Marxism or learning things like Leninism, putting them together. And if you want to go with people who are brown, you can also go with people like Mao, and you can go with people like Che Guevara and many other different brown people and black people who also, or W.E.B. Du Bois. You can go that route and actually learn from them and see what their thoughts are. But it's great to do, because once you start to learn it, then you realize I'm not crazy. And that's what Marxism taught me. I'm not crazy.
So I need you guys to grade JB on that. Well, how do you...
Oh no!
I'm just playing. I couldn't say it better myself. Any thoughts that you guys have? I have a video I want to show you guys real quick. But I won't pass it to the panel going once, going twice. Anything you guys want to add before I move on? Go ahead, Carlos.
Well, I thought that that was perfect. And JB, one of the things that I know Noah emphasizes always in the class is how intuitive he is. And, you know, there's times where he's came up with these metaphors like revolution being the midwife of history. And you're like, man, that's Marx 1854, speaking to a salon full of workers. Oh, where'd you pull that one from? And there was one that one of his that he dropped in an interview he did with me, and I was like, man, I got to add this to the book, and I ended up citing him in that interview. But you guys are absolutely right. And when you become a student of the previous revolutions that succeeded and the ones that came to be as successful as possible in the countries, even if they failed, one of the most important elements of these struggles has always been the theoretical education of the people. Whether it's the Chinese, whether it's Che Guevara and the Cuban Revolution, whether it's the Black Panthers here at home, it's always such an important factor because it gives us the clarity to understand things systemically. And look, the bourgeoisie is not stupid. It knows that the life that it provides for the vast amounts of people that live under its system is horrible, and people are going to dissent. And so for the last at least century, the bourgeoisie has had to go from, simply pumping out propaganda that's explicitly pro-capital to being a little bit more nefarious, to being a little bit more elaborate with how it obtains consent and it sustains hegemony. And it's got to present us with a bunch of fake lefts. It's got to present us with a bunch of AOCs. It's got to present us with a bunch of fake Marxists. It's got to present us with a bunch of Zizeks and all these other people that what they are is, as a friend of ours, fellow scholar, Gabriel Rocco, uses the term radical recuperators. They get the spirit of radicalism that's rising in the people and they recuperate it into the pro-imperialist fold. And it ends up working as what I've called a compatible counter-hegemonic left, a controlled left. And when you have Marxism on your side, you're able to smell this. You smell it and you're able to distinguish, okay, what's going on here? Who's trying to get me into the pro-imperialist fold? Who's got the labels? Who's got the hammer and sickle on their bio or on their organization, but is actually siding with the imperialists and against the working class? And that's what Marxism offers for us. And, it's so important in our era. Bourgeois ideology has become so elaborate. And if we do not equip ourselves with the only tradition that can dismantle it ideologically and show it for what it is, a farce that's aimed at continuing a world where the vast majority of people are exploited, oppressed, and live in tremendous immiseration. If we don't do that, we're going to keep losing. And we've had tremendous movements. We have a situation right now in our country where it's pregnant with a tremendous revolutionary potential. The people's lives are just getting harder and harder and harder. The ruling class is fighting with itself, and this is the formula that the Leninist tradition tells us. It's when the people can't continue in the old way and the ruling classes themselves cannot continue in the old way that revolutions have the potential of happening. Those are what we call the objective conditions. And we're seeing it in the crumbling of empire, in the crumbling of legitimacy. We have a serious crisis of legitimacy. 11% of our people trust the media. Less than 20% say that their elected representatives actually represent them. That's a recipe for a collapse. But as Lenin always was fond of saying, these orders, they might wobble all they want, but they won't fall until we topple them. And we won't topple them until we develop the subjective factor, until we develop theoretical clarity and we become organized.
Can I add one little thing onto that? That was absolutely 1000% on point. I just want to add that our era is the era of the surveillance state, the era of us knowing for a fact what the ruling class has been doing in order to wreck our organizing over the last decades. They put infiltrators in, they surveil us, et cetera, et cetera. They come up with all of these hip new theories to try to distract us. They come up with all the posts and everything the Bourgeois Academy is putting out, right? And so when we go into actual organizations, into the Communist Party or into a labor union or even your local neighborhood committees, whatever it is, if we all have ourselves armed with a knowledge of Marxism and we're using this worldview and this outlook to inform all of our sort of rhetoric and actions, what we're doing, those that aren't and are only saying revolutionary sounding words become very apparent very quickly. And so in the era of modern, sabotage and wrecking and infiltration and surveillance, the only way forward that I can think of is all of us to at least know the basics, right? That's why the class I teach the JBs in is called Basics of Marxism, to give us the tools we need to not have to trust anybody, right? To not have to trust AOC when she tells us she's a socialist, right? So we can, I always use the analogy, we don't need them to tell us what time it is. We can buy our own damn watches, right? And we can judge the time for ourselves.
I said a few times on this show that once you understand basic concepts of Marxism, and Carlos and Noah did a good job pointing out how fake lefts like AOC would develop. And once you understand Marxism, happening in our society start to make sense. I had Q Anthony and Mene on. He explained that there are a lot of people that go around and things seem random, they seem chaotic. They don't understand what's happening. They don't understand why the ruling class is betraying workers. There's so many people who don't understand that why the Bernie movement failed, why the Justice Democrats are selling us out. But through the tenets of Marxism, you understand that none of these happenings among the ruling class, none of these actions are accidental. It's actually very predictable if you understand how the ruling class, the way capital operate. So if you knew Marxism, if I knew Marxism before, maybe we would have snuffed out the sheepdogs like Bernie Sanders. Maybe we would have snuffed out a lot of these head fakes from the Democratic Party. JB, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, well, it's basically a Trojan horse. It's a Marxist Trojan horse. It's basically saying you get, for instance, because this is why I say the Democratic and Republican parties work in tandem with each other. The Democratic parties will make it sound like, well, I'm a Democratic. They'll put Democrat, even though socialism is inherently democratic anyway. It's an oxymoron just to put democratic in front of it. But anyways, so they'll put democratic socialism and they'll tag the word socialist to themselves for some sectors of the Democratic Party. And then this allows the Republican Party to go, oh my God, they're socialists, they're Marxists, when in reality, they're keeping the system in place for the capitalists. Damn. And so the sky said amen. And so what ends up happening is that it's a Trojan horse because it makes people think, oh, the Democratic Party's Marxist, when in reality, they're just a bunch of capitalists and a horse that says that's labeled Marxist. And then by the time they come in, you think, oh my God, they're Marxists, and they come in, they're capitalists, and then you think, oh my God, they're Marxists doing capitalist things. People, and this goes into the effect when everybody complains about capitalism, they say it's communism, even though it's capitalism the entire time.
Yeah, that's exactly what they do. And
yeah,
JB, go ahead, JB.
These corporate people and these dictators, they're communists because they're extracting all the wealth from the workers. And I'm like, wait a minute. Hold up. Wait a minute. This ain't communism, baby.
Joe Biden's a communist according to Tammy Warren.
Oh, Merriam-Webster. Look, Merriam-Webster. She's a good one. Go ahead, look her up and go and look and see what is communism compared to what is capitalism. And that's another thing. People don't learn definitions no more. Y'all just need to pick up a dictionary and start use your words and start learning the definitions of these words, because the thing is that what the ruling class will do is that they will either dilute or they will misrepresent what a word means in order to vilify people for something that's actually good. It's just like how we back then. We used to say, oh man, you bad. We didn't mean bad as in you were bad. We meant bad as in you were good. But the thing is that that's what they do in a more perverted fashion. So we need to learn the actual definitions. What socialism is the workers owning the means of production and distribution within a given society, and it's a transition from capitalism to communism. That's what people need to learn. The problem is that a lot of you people are listening to capitalists trying to explain socialism and communism. If you want to learn what socialism and communism is, ask a socialist and a communist. Don't ask a capitalist.
I want to pass it to the panel because we mentioned these social democrats a few times. So I want to actually ask your guys' opinions about your critiques of social democrats, which I have quite a few, because you have the massive betrayal of DSA, Bernie Sanders, and the Democrat, socialist, social democrat left A lot of them who are getting in bed with strikebreakers, for example. A lot of them became rank imperialists, especially regarding the Ukraine war. But the funny thing is, I didn't realize this until recently. Marxism and communists predicts this. Like, and that's the funny thing. Like, there's a strong critique of social democrats that I wasn't aware of until maybe the last few years. And once you understood that critique, you're like, of course Bernie Sanders is the way he is. Of course, because they are the chosen opposition by the capitalist class. Why do you guys think they call themselves social democrats, democratic socialists? You call yourself that only if you agree with the capitalist framework that socialism isn't democratic. So you got to call yourself a democratic socialist to wave to the capitalist class that, hey, I'm one of the good ones. But anyway, I don't want, it's about you guys. I want to hear your guys' opinion because a major focus of RBN, and a lot of people are confused why we do this. But I focus a lot on the critiques of the social democrats because they are leading the workers off the cliff and playing a very particular role for capital. But I'll talk too much. I won't pass the panel. Anyone want to chime in from MidWestern Marx? I'll make it like an open panel for this part. If you guys want to explain your critiques of social democracy and democratic socialists, go ahead, Eddie.
Definitely, exactly like you said. And I say this as someone who threw myself into the Bernie campaign. That's kind of how Carlos and I originally became friends. But yeah, you start reading Marx and you realize that this is the role that social democrats have always played historically, right? And some of them are more opportunist or more imperialist than others, but they've always played this role of basically saying we need to soften the edge of capitalism. You know, we need to implement social programs, but when push comes to shove, like when there's something like what's going on in Ukraine right now, they always historically side with the imperialists. You know, and back during World War I, a lot of the what we now call social democrats were siding with World War I. And you can see this with the social democrats here in the United States, with Bernie Sanders and AOC going along with these acts of imperialist aggression and the U.S.'s proxy war project in Ukraine. Or you can see it with the countries where social democracy is actually in power, like Switzerland, Norway, Denmark. Almost all of these countries had troops in Iraq. You know, almost all of them are pro-NATO and now trying to join NATO, siding with the West and siding with capitalism ahead of countries like China and socialism in the East, and this rising counter-hegemonic group of countries that are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So when push comes to shove, when the rubber meets the road, so to speak, the social democrats always side with capital historically, always, and they never seem to be able to resist imperialist opportunism. There are certain examples like Bernie, you know, critiquing the war in Iraq. But then, you know, a few years before that, he was cheering on the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, you know, and then now we have him basically being a cheerleader for the proxy war in Ukraine.
You guys see his bill? I want you to continue, Eddie, but you guys see his pathetic Ukraine bill where more military bill where he said we want to decrease the military budget by a measly 10%, and then in the bill they said with exception for assistance going to Ukraine, and Bernie voted against authorization for more oversight for Ukraine weapons. Like probably one of the biggest betrayals we ever seen. But sorry, go ahead, Eddie.
No, I mean that's exactly it, right? That they make themselves appear as better than the other guys, better than the capitalists, because they want to reduce the military budget 10%, while in substance they're still siding with NATO and still siding with the primary imperialist project. And you see the same even when it comes to domestic issues, like the things that they claim to stand for, like Medicare for all. A lot of times when push comes to shove, you have like AOC saying she's not going to do force the vote because she doesn't want to cause relational harm within the Democratic Party. So basically, I'm not going to fight for healthcare for the working people because I don't want to piss off Nancy Pelosi, one of the most corrupt politicians of all time.
Relational harm my ass.
Right. Yeah. Right. So a lot of times it's the rhetoric of socialists, the rhetoric of being radical, and then whenever it comes time to make policy or fight for something, they line up behind the imperialists and the oligarchs.
I know you guys probably wondering. I want to pass it to Noah and Carlos after this. You guys wonder, well, come on, why are you guys so mean to the social democrats? Why are you guys so? They say the good things, right? You guys understand this is a global, massive problem. It's a scourge on the left the Social Democrats. Am I being too rude? No. Look at the scourge of Social Democrats in Sweden and Finland that just buddied up to NATO. And you have Sweden, communists and socialists, who was protesting Sweden inclusion into NATO. This is what a lot of people don't cover. Democracy Now! Actually did a surprisingly good segment when they brought on a Swedish peace activist who was a socialist who was explaining how there was a massive liberal propaganda campaign in Sweden and Finland to get them to accept NATO. You want to know who sided with them? The Social Democrats, the people that helped elect the first female prime minister in Finland. They did the Social Democrat wing of their party. They sided with the liberals and betrayed socialists and communists in Sweden and Finland in order to join NATO, a capitalist imperialist institution. So we're not being dramatic here when we're talking about burning AOC, and not just a United States problem. It's a worldwide problem of social democrats siding with capital and siding with empire. Sweden, by the way, is the largest, or for safety, I say, is one of the largest funders of the Yemen war. You guys know the war in Yemen? They massively funded that genocide. And then you have Bernie Sanders left is like, oh my God, look at this great country, Sweden. The fuck? That is not the end goal at all. At all, having a country that benefits from funding genocide, has an active arms industry, that's not the end goal. But sorry, no, I'm gonna get Noah and Carlos in here for your general critiques of social democrats. And if anything you want to chime on regarding what you heard anyone say recently before we move on to the next topic.
Yeah, let's not beat around the bush here. There's a reason the Soviets called social democracy at the time the moderate wing of fascism. Because it's that relationship between them and the fascists in a working relationship that allows fascism to rise, right? When you go into crisis, if you're trying to negotiate, etc., that's not working as the ruling class is clamping down, as they're oppressing us more and more and more, etc. Look what they're doing right now. As the things are deteriorating here, they're sending more and more of our tax dollars to literal doctrinaire Nazis in Ukraine in order to wage a proxy war to keep their class in power, right? It isn't just, an option between the two of them. It is the relationship between these two supposed factions that is the system we're critiquing. They're an inherent part of it, right? And so overcoming them and understanding this is one of the reasons Marxism is so essential, because it shows us the material view of fascism, right? It shows us what can lead to it, what forms it will take, why it will take certain forms in certain situations, why AOC is very comfortable working with literal doctrinaire Nazis who nickname each other Adolf and things like that, right? And why she's against American working class people getting healthcare, which is what she ran on, right? Marxism is the key to understanding all of that.
And there's such a long tradition here, man. There's a really important piece that Lenin writes right when it's happening. You have, in the history of socialism, you have the first international that's ran by Marx, and then you develop the second international, spearheaded by Engels for many years. And then the First World War comes around, and everyone votes, we're not going to send working class people to kill working class people from another country for the sake of the imperialist rulers of our country, because it was an inter-imperialist war. And then after everyone votes to say no, they break that. And these sheepdogs all side with their imperialists, with the exception of the Bolsheviks, the exception of actually the Socialist Party of America. That's why you have Debs in prison and a few people from the Socialist Party in prison here. That's where the Espionage Act comes from. And I think the Italian party, and that's always been the history of social democracy, especially in the imperial countries. It's been siding with the imperialists. And it's rooted in various class positions. It's rooted at times in a labor aristocracy where the top leaders of unions sell out the interests of the rank and file for the sake of crumbs that are taken from the super profits that imperialism extracts from across the world. And that is an environment that festers ideologically this right opportunism that makes people who claim to be siding with the working class actually in substance side with the imperialists. And we live in a country that has been so heavily indoctrinated with McCarthyite anti-communism, where, you ask anyone about socialist countries, and all that they can bring up from school is, Stalin killed 10 million people, and Mao killed 3 billion, and Stalin ate the babies and babies, as Noah's fond of saying. And that's bullshit. And the not only is it bullshit, but we'll never get anywhere if the left that we have, these social democrats, if they when people ask them about the legacy of socialism in real socialist countries abroad, they just say, yeah, everything the ruling class told you is true. All these countries suck. The Soviet Union was horrible. China's horrible. It's a totalitarian hellhole. Cuba's horrible. When we do that, the working class person talking to us has to be as stupid as us in order to accept that. If instead of coming with that narrative, which is the ruling class's narrative, socialism has always failed, we show the people this is what socialism has been able to do in the Soviet Union, in the DPRK, in China, in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cuba, everywhere, even while under the boot of imperialism and hybrid warfare. This is what they've been able to do. They've been able to lift basically 1 billion people out of poverty, gave them dignified lives, and they're continuing to do that, and they're leading the world in technology and in all these amazing areas that make people's lives easier. If we show them that, that's a completely different message. And so, what these social democrats do, and their form of analysis, not only does it prevent them from actually understanding the world correctly, it prevents them from getting to truth and understanding the world as it actually is. It also prevents them from building a revolutionary movement. And it's no coincidence that these same countries that have these wonderful social democrats that are criticizing the shit out of real socialism, they're the same ones that have never been able to produce a revolution in their life. That's not a coincidence. That is not a coincidence. Who the hell is going to follow you when you say socialism has failed all over the world, but we, the virtuous West, the virtuous Americans, we're the ones that are going to get it right for the first time? That's bullshit. Instead of that, we should tell the people the truth about socialism, tell them the fact that it's always worked, and worked for who? For working people like them. It hasn't worked for the monopolists that are their enemies. And yeah, so there's so many, there's a myriad of flaws that we have in our left here, and that's part of what I try to get at in this book by using the concept of the purity fetish. But when we have Marxist analysis, we not only can understand things correctly, but we can break the chain that we've had over the last century of just being revolutionarily futile. We can bring back a revolutionary tradition that's actually substantive and can actually defeat empire. And the moment couldn't be any riper.
Can I just add something real quick onto that?
Yeah, JB after Noah, absolutely.
The U.S. has such a long and rich revolutionary tradition. Right here, it gets hidden from us. Right, we're not taught it in school. Our media doesn't ever mention it. It pushes it to the sides and marginalizes everything to do with it. But think about it. This is the country that produced a Harriet Tubman, a Martin Luther King Jr., and the father of American Marxism, W.E.B. Du Bois. Right? It is that thought that creates the particular American form of Marxism, and it allows us to correctly understand the different forms of class struggle that have been so important in the formation of this country, in the American people becoming the American people who we are today. Right? Without Du Bois, we don't have a scientific view of the problem of the color line, right? Of why institutional racism begins, of how slavery is what affects racism rather than the other way around, right? Du Bois is what gives us that and begins to give us the way forward, especially in this era, because this era, as we were talking about earlier, is full of revolutionary potential objectively. It's the subjective factor that's missing. It's us, right? And so as we educate ourselves, as people are being reproletarianized in our era, it allows us to formulate a genuine scientific way forward that actually works.
Mm-hmm. JB, you want to chime in? And then I want to show you got something after JB. Go ahead.
Yeah, so when people talk about socially democratic countries, they're always praised, especially among the democratic socialists. They'll say Finland, Iceland, Sweden, France, Germany, Belgium, whatever. They'll say these socially democratic countries are still doing so well. But one thing that a lot of people don't realize that these socially democratic countries are doing so well because they're profiting off the backs of people who are exploited in the global south. How do I know this? So I'm going to share my screen really quick. Has anybody in the chat or anybody watching on the rewatch ever heard of King Leopold of Belgium?
Yeah.
If you have not, then you're going to see somebody who's actually worse than Hitler. If you can see this is out of the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. King Leopold of Belgium actually cut off the hands of Congolese people if they failed to meet a quota for farming rubber. And so this is what they did. 10 million Congolese people were killed, murdered by King Leopold of Belgium. And this was King Leopold of Belgium, and pointing to a person that their hand was cut off. And including, still down to this day, they sell chocolate hands in Belgium as a treat. And so here's the thing. When you talk about democratically socialist countries or social democracies, they get their universal health care. They'll get their ability to have all these different programs, but it's off the backs of people in the global south. So therefore, they're living high off the hog based off of exploitation of an overly exploited country. How in the world do you think France is so rich? Because they extract the gold from Africa. They extract resources from these countries so that they can have these beautiful lives that they live, that we somehow say, oh, well, we want to have a country like theirs. And so this is the fault. So this is why it's like having a big ass mansion, but then you don't see the workers in the basement in horrible conditions. And you're like, I want to live like that person in the mansion. But the thing is that, do you really want to, based on who they have working in their basement? And that's the question that people need to ask. But this means that you have to have class consciousness and to realize that you need to have solidarity with workers everywhere. We're talking about workers in Palestine. We're talking about workers in Democratic Republic of Congo. We're talking about workers in Sri Lanka. We're talking about workers in Brazil and in Bolivia. This is who we're talking about.
And if I could just add something real quick, that's why the Martinique communist Aimé Césaire, when fascism came around, he said there's not much new here. All that is being done is what Europe has always done to Africa and to the third world, to itself. And yeah, that point that you make there, brother, is so important.
Yeah, I want to. We getting near the end of this panel. This has been very good for the soul, good for the brain as well. And I think this is one of the panels that we need to do every so often, because there's so much that we can discuss on this issue. I'm literally cutting like half the scheduled programming because there's so much to learn, even in breaking down current acts of the empire, current happenings. I have Eddie on a few times, but this is something that we definitely got to continue to expound on because there's so much to touch on. But I want to show you guys this clip that has lived rent-free in my head ever since I seen it. like literally, you guys have stuff that gets stuck in your brain and you can't turn it off. This speech by Kwame Ture is one of those for me. So why am I playing it? I don't know. I just want to fucking show it to you guys. I'm sure many of you guys have seen it. I think it fits with the premise of this panel pretty well. So this is Kwame Ture on Karl Marx and socialism. Listen to this.
My birthday twin.
Yeah, I love this one.
It hasn't gone anywhere. It has been betrayed, yes. But betrayal doesn't mean collapse. Perhaps they get confused because at least Judas had the dignity after betraying Christianity to hang himself. Gorbachev is still running around the world picking up pieces of silver. Must be clear here and not confused. I'm a socialist. One other thing I must tell you now. They confuse people about socialism. Brother the other day said, "Why ain't no socialist?" I said, "Why not, brother?" He said, "Because it's a white thing." I said, "Oh, really?" You see, Europe tries to make believe that everything that comes out of the world comes out of Europe. I told the man, I said, "Socialism ain't no white thing." He said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Karl Marx discovered it." I told him, Karl Marx never discovered socialism. He cannot. You call the laws of gravity Newton's laws. I'm sure there's a mnemonic device to help you on your quizzes. But you certainly cannot believe that Isaac Newton can found that a body falls at the rate of 32 feet per second squared per second squared. He can't find this. He can't discover it. He cannot invent this. He can only observe it and record it, discover the law. If I'm sitting in Timbuktu in Africa and I've never heard of Sir Isaac Newton and I'm conducting any experiments with gravity, I will come to the same conclusion that he does. A body in motion tends to stay in motion unless stopped by an outside force. He cannot invent this. He can only observe it and record it. Karl Marx did not invent socialism. If I'm sitting in Libya in the desert and I'm doing any research with capital and labor without ever having heard of Karl Marx, I will come to the same conclusion that he did. That any time capital seeks to dominate labor, there'll be a ruthless, uncompromising struggle on the part of labor until it comes to crush capital and dominate it. This is a fact. My history demonstrates that. We came here as chattel slaves for centuries. We fought and fought and fought until we crushed it. Now we're just slave of the wage, and now we've got to rise up and crush that one. That's to declare that Karl Marx didn't invent socialism. It's there for all to see. Karl Marx's great contribution to the world was in the area of historical materialism and dialectical materialism, something you need to know if you know about socialism. But since you don't know about socialism, you don't even know the words. And not only does the enemy keep you ignorant, you stay ignorant. You won't ever go read a book about socialism. Why read a book about socialism? They already told me in my class it ain't no good. You will not even read a book about socialism. Why, you don't even read a book about your history. We come to inspire you to learn. We come to tell you that when you come to serve a people, you must know as much as you can. The more you know, the better able you are to serve the people.
The more you know, the more you're able to serve the people. You guys see why this clip been living rent free in my head for maybe 3 years now, ever since I first seen it. I'll open up to the panel. Feel free to chime in. I'm sure you guys won't talk over yourself. I want general reactions to that, and we are nearing the end, so you also can get ready for final statements because I see some Green Party members coming in. So I open it to Eddie. I see you're unmuted. I see Noah's unmuted. So I'll pass it to you two first.
I think we're both ready to go. That's such an amazing video. I actually remember the first time I watched it. I was just getting into reading Marx, and it really helped me understand it. And a lot of people say that Marxism is Eurocentric, right? Marxism is just white people shit. But and Marx's analysis was of Europe, right? Marx's analysis, he applied dialectical materialism to where he was from. But then you have all these thinkers like Mao and Lenin and Thomas Sankara and Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture, who take the dialectical and historical materialist analysis or method and apply it to their own conditions. And actually, that's one of the places where Marx's prediction was wrong. He predicted that in the Western European countries where capitalism came about first, you would have the first socialist revolutions. But what actually happened was the colonized world took his theory and ran with it. Folks like Lenin and folks like Mao and the other ones that I mentioned, Che Guevara and Fidel and Cuba, they took the Marxist method and applied it to their own conditions and brought about socialist revolutions that changed the world forever. So, maybe Marxism's origins were slightly Eurocentric, but the Marxist tradition, has always belonged to the global South and the colonized world and the working classes of every country.
I want to pass it to Noah if you still want to chime in.
Yeah, I love this clip so much. Rather than just get into like what Marx was saying, I kind of, it always makes me think of when I was a teenager, right? And I was first learning this Marxism stuff from my dad. I bring it to my friends at school, and I live in I went to a school that was maybe 80% black. And that was exactly what I would get told. Man, that's some white people shit. Don't give me that, right? And I'd be like, no, look. And I would, bring in books by black Marxists. And it gets people. As soon as, you realize that Marxism is a scientific way of viewing the world, you realize it's not Eurocentric or whatever the hip bourgeois thinkers will tell you it is now to keep you away from learning it, right? It's not whatever. And that brings people together. And that brought me and my friends back then closer together, was learning from Huey Newton, actually, was who got a good friend of mine, Deshaun, into it. But I don't know. It's everything. Like, learning that teaches you everything. Like he was saying, like, the dialectical and historical materialist approach is universal. It could have been someone in Timbuktu, right? It didn't have to be Marx. It was the world getting to a stage where that sort of theory could develop, as I'm sure JB remembers from our class on Engels and socialism, utopian and scientific.
I just want to say, excuse my French, but how the fuck is a worldview that has been the most successful in conquering power for oppressed and exploited people in the third world, in the global south and east, how in the hell is that Eurocentric? This is all it's a creation of the academy, of the same people that don't want us to read Marx, of the same people that if they give us Marx in the academy, they give us the early writings, they will never give us Lenin, they'll never give us Mao, they'll never give us any of the thinkers that actually participated in achieving revolutions and in developing scientific socialism in the era of imperialism and proletarian revolution. They won't give us those people. Except for I have them in my intro to philosophy class. I sneak them in. I don't know how I haven't been fired because of it, but I got Mao, Che, Lenin, all the guys. But and Marx himself, he adjusted. His idea was that capitalism is going to develop, that creates the proletariat and leads to socialism. Then he studied anthropological and ethnological studies in South America, in India, in Russia, and he came to a different conclusion towards the end of his life. And now, we only have the manuscripts. I've been able to read most of the manuscripts. There's some that are still, they haven't even been published yet. And in these manuscripts, he comes to the conclusion that it could be the other way around. It could be the third world because there's more communalist traditions in large chunks of the third world that haven't been dissolved because of capitalist individualism that could lead to socialism occurring there first. And so I want to maybe push back and say maybe Marx wasn't right here because he adjusted there at the end of his life, and the predictions of the older Marx came true, which was, you see it in Russia, Korea, China, Cuba. The colonized and imperialized world was the one that took the mantle of Marxism, and specifically Marxism-Leninism, the Third International Marxism, the part of the split in socialism that said, no. We have to fight against colonialism. We have to fight against racism. All of these are important forms of class struggle. It's not just, your opportunist and immediatist trade union struggle. It's all of it. All of these struggles are one struggle. You can't think of them as separate and they connect. No. They're one struggle. The struggle of China against imperialism, the struggle of Africa against imperialism, the struggle of Cuba against imperialism. It's the same struggle as our working classes struggle here at home against our capitalists. It's the same capitalist class that exploits, oppresses, super exploits, and extracts resources from the global south and east that then keeps us immiserated at home and keeps us divided according to whatever other thing that they come up to divide us. So it's the same enemy and we have the same struggle. It's one struggle. And the test of an ideology today, in our day, that is pregnant with revolution is, can it unite the people or is it dividing the people? Can an ideology today unite the people to fight against war, to fight against empire, to fight against capitalism? And that's I think that this legacy of bringing the people together to fight against all of these things and to fight for socialism is something that I see RBN and our institute and a bunch of other good brothers and sisters in different organizations fighting for. And it's just a matter of time. It's there's, as Lenin used to say, was fond of saying, there's decades where it seems like nothing is happening, and then there's weeks where, man, decades happen right in front of you. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're working ourselves towards that nodal point where we hit some weeks and we're like, God damn, it's been 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks. It feels like it's been 10 years. So yeah, I think that's where we're at, but it's up to us. It's nothing is fatalistic. We're going to have to act and continue doing the sort of work that we're doing here with the Labor Summit and everything else that you guys do.
Yeah, and I love that you guys just help Kwame Ture dismantle the talking point that Marxism is a Eurocentric ideology. You guys want to know the people who propagate that are class enemies. I still remember the segment. This segment was burned in my skull. You had Al Sharpton This was during the Bernie campaign where he was saying how this new wave of socialism, this is white suburban kids who are out of touch with the workers. So you see their job is to gaslight and lie, the exact opposite of the reality. They were trying to pretend this new socialist, the Marxist movement is led by the bourgeoisie. It doesn't even make sense on faith value. It doesn't even make sense on faith value when you look at the fact that you had the Reagan administration, the United States waged war against the global South because it was the global South, Latin America, who embraced socialism, right? It was Southeast Asians who embraced socialism. So the idea that Marxism is Eurocentric doesn't pass the smell test, doesn't even make sense at face value.